My birthday's in June, so it's just a stone's throw away.
All right. Well, just a quick explanation. Nigel Jacobs will be here in 5 minutes. He thought this was at 10:30, so he's driving across town. He'll be here as fast as he can. So this is the Democratic primary endorsement interview for House District 40. The goal here is for us to, and by us I mean me, and then Nigel when he shows up, to get to know both of you and to decide who it is that we ought to endorse in this primary. So we may not ask equal time questions, we might ask one of you more questions than the other. It's not a debate, although certainly you're welcome and encouraged to respond to things that your opponent has said. So without any further delay, why don't we get started? And Charles, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners, viewers, readers at home. Tell us like a 2-minute elevator pitch of who you are and why you're running.
My name is Charles Gallia, and I am running for the Democratic nomination for House District 40. I grew up in the district and went to high school. And
where'd you go to high school?
Clackamas. And actually Clackamas grade school even. After I graduated from high school, I went 1 year to Portland State University and found that I kind of got in over my head because I didn't have anybody in my immediate family that had gone to school, so I didn't know what it was about. And I eventually went back and finished and got my bachelor's and then a PhD in public administration from Portland State University. I've spent the last 17 years with the Oregon Health Authority, and I ran a small manufacturing company before that, as well as a consulting firm. The things that I want to do as a legislator, I have to say, are pretty narrow. I want to move a significant piece of legislation out from the Universal Health Task Force that I helped write the bill that created that legislation that is developing. And the other is to modify some of the funding streams that go to children with special health care needs. My background with the Oregon Health Authority, I've been able to see that part of Oregon's losing out between $35 and $45 million per year because of the complexity of how we fund children's healthcare services and education. So that's two things. My biggest concern, though, is that the Oregon Health Authority and the state is facing nearly 300,000 people losing eligibility for coverage under OHP. And much like what happened in 2008, where almost 100,000 people were moved off because of administrative barriers, it devastated the healthcare system to this day we still haven't recovered from. And so that's what I'm going to be paying attention to as well.
Great. We'll come back to some of those policy points in a minute. James?
Thank you for the opportunity. I sincerely appreciate it. I grew up in Portland, Oregon.
Your full name, sorry?
James Farley.
Okay.
And grew up in Portland, in southeast Portland. Went to what was Washington High School, and subsequently went on to pursue degrees at Washington State, an undergrad and then a degree at Portland State, and then another program in executive leadership at the University of North Carolina. My entire background has been in healthcare. I started when I was 15, working as an orderly at Providence, Portland, and subsequently moved on and went overseas after graduate school, was in the Peace Corps assessing the healthcare system in Western Samoa. Came back and had a long career with Kaiser Permanente in this market. Subsequently went on to a leadership role setting up the medical group for Peace Health across Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. Then was recruited to Chief Operating Officer with Advocate Healthcare in the Chicago area, Chicago/Illinois/other neighboring states. and then was recruited to a similar role as the senior vice president with MedStar Health in the Washington, D.C. area. My kind of last more formal role was beginning with the advisory board out of Washington, D.C. And the advisory board was acquired by Optum Health. So I was serving as a senior vice president over strategy and consulting. And then got recruited a different role within United Health Group, which is the parent company for United Healthcare and Optum, to lead their work in cost of care reduction across both companies. You may not be familiar with that company, but it is
A little. Yeah.
But it is very large nationally. It's the nation's largest insurer, and their delivery side of the company, which is Optum, employs right now between 50 and 60,000 physicians, and runs a very large pharmacy management company, and a very large data and consulting company on the Optum side. What isn't known is it's actually an international company. It provides the majority of care in South America, has operations in Australia, India, Europe, other places. So much of my work was international as much as it is domestic.
So you've been in the health insurance industry for how many years?
Well, I wouldn't say insurance, because the majority of it has been overseeing the delivery of care.
I see.
Just like I said, my role with Peace Health was to set up their medical group. My role with Advocate Healthcare was to set up what was a very segregated model of care and organize it into a single delivery system to run all of their non-hospital businesses, especially as what I was really recruited for is to help them move from point of service, fee-for-service care into population health and more value-based care, and to have a delivery system that does that. And that's based on my background with Kaiser, so that we're looking at delivering care to populations of people and looking at effective ways to improve care and care outcomes.
What makes you want to run for office?
I moved back here. I was living in Washington. My wife and I were living in Washington, D.C. We have 2 grown children, and at the time they were both in New York City. But my wife's parents, my wife also grew up here. She grew up in Lake Oswego area. They have deep roots in Oregon City, own a business there and some other commercial property. And both of my wife's parents were becoming very ill, and my wife was spending half of her time here taking care of them and half back there. And it just seemed like we wanted to make the commitment to come back here and see them through the last few years of their lives. They both since passed. And I retired a year ago. And one of my commitments to myself was to give back to the state and the community that I grew up in. And I believe that I have, over the course of my career, been in situations where I'm trying to tackle very large delivery system problems across states, across regions of care, and have been effective at sort of managing the internal politics and the local politics to make that effective. It's not always about care, health care. Sometimes it's about food inequities, it's about housing. Everything goes back to care, everybody gets sick. And it all ends up coming back together in terms of our social fabric and infrastructure about how we care for one another.
Sure. I think it's unusual to see 2 candidates running in the same district in the same primary who have, if not the same background, a specialty that's similar. That we have 2 people who have expertise in healthcare. So let me ask this question to both of you, and James, you can go first. What did the pandemic reveal to you about America's healthcare system that needs fixed? Maybe more specifically, Oregon's healthcare system that needs fixed.
You may notice on my bio that I'm currently serving as a director for Ammonia Capital. That the reason that I'm doing that work with the company is it's not for income. It's out of opportunity. And I think that what the pandemic did is it showed us a new opportunity to deliver care in a different way. We are, not just in Oregon, but nationally, we've we've not done delivered care in the most effective way. The pandemic has exposed an opportunity to deliver care that typically had been done as facility-based services. Sleep studies, epilepsy studies, all sorts of diagnostic and chronic care delivery that can be done in the home and can be done in non-acute care facilities. What the pandemic has done is said, if you don't really need to go to the hospital because of something, there is a way to get care delivery to you that can be coordinated by a hospital but can be delivered somewhere else. So what the pandemic has done has exposed the opportunity to be much more efficient with our delivery system.
Great.
and thereby lowering the cost for everybody.
Charles, same question.
Could you restate it?
What did the pandemic reveal about Oregon's healthcare system that's working or not working or could be better?
Well, there's two things. One is that how quickly the entire pandemic became politicized. It was used as a tool to create divisions, and that's unfortunate. And that meant to me that people aren't aware of the authority of what public health actions and activities are available to states. How we respond as a society, and some of those things were rules that were in place a long time. This wasn't, it was the first time that we had the opportunity to respond to it. The other is that we have a very fragile system. Oregon's unique in that our hospitalization number of beds per person is probably one of the lowest in the country. And that was actually a kind of a policy decision that was meant to make our whole system more efficient. That we would do more outpatient services, that we'd focus on some of the preventive care upstream, and we'd make some of those investments. But it was also local. And some of the response that we had to rely on more than anything else was counties. And counties play a critical part. There's federal qualified health centers, in the disbursement of vaccines, the distribution of masks and protective gear. All of those were a critical part of what our infrastructure is. We need to have more effective communication systems between our delivery systems, and also have a little stronger plan for if and when this happens next time. It may not be a pandemic, it might be another natural disaster, but we need to be prepared to know that we have the emergency responses as well as the other preventive services upstream that will allow us to do it. And so that's what it showed me, is that we have some vulnerabilities that we need to address. And part of it is making sure that people understand the value of things like vaccines and even masking.
Great. Charles, you've run for office before.
Yes.
Genuine question, because I don't remember. Did you win?
No.
Where'd you run and what happened?
I ran for the state senate in this same area. It's District 20. And I lost to the two-term incumbent, Alan Olson, by about 5%. But in the House district, the one that I'm running in, I won by 55% of the vote.
Got it. So this is in this district, which I imagine has a different makeup.
Right.
On a partisan level, the voter
Right.
registration would be different, right? So
considerably.
Because it's smaller. So
right.
That makes
smaller,
sense.
and also just the area that's Oregon City, Gladstone, Jennings Lodge, as opposed to taking in Canby and some of the more Republican-leaning areas.
What did you learn from that experience? Losing's always hard.
Well, when I lost, one of the things, there was a central committee meeting almost immediately afterwards. And the chair at the time invited people who ran and won up to the podium. And then he asked me to join, even though I had lost. And the 200 or so people that were in the room applauded and stood up. And it was very moving. And what I realized is that people really do vote with their hearts in part. And they're driven by values that sometimes you can't see, that can't be conveyed in a piece of paper. And it told me that while it might be tough, losing, there's still some ground and some things that I need to do to take care of, and that's why it's decided, with their support, to step back in. And so I continued my public service. I was chair of the Clackamas County Democrats. I became treasurer for the Community Health Centers for Clackamas County, was chair of the Economic Development Commission, and on the budget committee for the Clackamas Fire Board. So I just focused in on those things that were really important. And I'd say one of the most important things of all was that I went back to the legislature and I was able to help rewrite Senate Bill 770 that created the Universal Task Force, or Universal Healthcare Task Force, that's proposing legislation to the 2023 legislature that is going to move us down the road towards universal single-payer healthcare.
Got it. Have you run for office before?
Never.
What made you decide to get into this race?
Well, I think I mentioned that a minute ago. I moved back here into this community because we have roots in the community. And I made a commitment after I retired to invest my time and energy back into the state. I believe I have the set of experience that allows me to do that. Not only from a business and healthcare perspective, but while I did live in this community. So when I was raising my kids, I actually lived in Vancouver. I didn't live in Oregon, but I was extremely active in a number of things. I was on the state by state task force for the Columbia Crossing, and led Chamber of Commerce there for 2 terms. Did work with both the county and the city, and stood up organizations that were focused on improving the overall quality of health in the region of Southwest Washington. So everywhere I've been that I've been working, I've leaned into the community to provide leadership and support. This is no different.
Have you read his Universal Healthcare Task Force recommendation?
I've read the first opening part of it. I haven't read the whole thing.
Any immediate thoughts on that policy? It's his top priority.
Yeah, I think it's policy, but I also think that there's some practicality into putting it into place. It's not clear where the funding is going to come from. It's not clear how it's going to be really effectively administered. I mean, one of the challenges that the CCOs have now, which is the existing structure that's in place, is that there is too much administrative burden both on the plans themselves and those that are delivering the care. They're weighted down in administrative requirements as opposed to seeing patients. That's their number one complaint as I've met with them. So, I think everything that we do, there is yes, what's the bullet to fix the problem, and then there's how is it going to play out, how's it going to get funded. If you don't mind, I'll give you an example.
Sure, go ahead, and then I'll let you respond.
Thank you.
So, 2 years ago, the state approved the decriminalization of drugs. I voted for it. I supported it. It was the right thing to do. The fact that we were criminalizing marginalized parts of our society disproportionately was not the right thing. And yet, that particular initiative was modeled after what Portugal did, where they decriminalized drugs. But unlike Portugal, who has a really strong safety net for the unhoused, and also has a family court system for reviewing people who are on the streets for their mental capacity, for their drug addiction, and that family court, then if somebody can't take care of themselves for one of those reasons, people are remanded into a program. Now, I applaud the legislature for recently improving funding for mental health and addiction medicine, but it's not enough and it's not fast enough.
Do you think it would have been better to delay the implementation of the decriminalization until the cash had flowed or was ready to flow to the treatment facilities? I mean, there's $270 million just sitting there. It's not been used.
Correct. There's no plan.
Right.
So
it felt good to decriminalize, but it would have felt better to actually have treatment in place.
We've essentially pushed people from the jails to the streets.
Right.
And if we don't get our arms around that quickly, people will leave the state. They are leaving the state. We're driving up crime. There's issues of safety. There's actually issues of health, the health and hygiene of people who are not living in safe conditions. So I think, and I'm only using it to illustrate, we have other issues where we fix one thing saying, oh, it's good, but we don't have a comprehensive strategy. We haven't thought through it comprehensively. And that's my concern about universal health care. We haven't thought through it.
Coming in late. Before we go to Charles on his plan, I just want to ask, why were you living in Southwest Washington?
I said my wife and I were in the Peace Corps. We moved back to the Portland area. I sought out Kaiser as a place where I thought at the time they were more focused on delivering holistic care as opposed to sort of fee-for-service care. That attracted me based on what I've been doing. And my role there was to run the operations for Kaiser in Southwest Washington.
So the job was there. It wasn't that you were commuting.
Wasn't commuting, and part of my deal with them and vice versa was that they wanted me to get very active in the community.
Got it. So I apologize for missing that at the outset.
Charles, please respond on the.
So when I crafted the Senate Bill 770, it's actually extremely comprehensive. We took some of the suggestions from the UN's, the World Health Care Organizations, to describe what a healthcare system of excellence required. We included the financial assessments that you're describing. We went to and we looked at what other states were exploring. All of these elements are included in an assessment that's going to be proposed as part of this legislation. It was extremely thoughtful, and the brightest minds in Oregon are now wrestling with that question on a regular basis with subgroups. But the pinnacle of it is that it's patient-centered care, and it isn't an insurer that's interceding between the patient and the doctor. That means that what we're going to be able to do is that if you're improving your own health care, that the rewards and benefits go to you as opposed to an insurance company that might be based in another state. Returning and reinvesting in the healthcare system that we have here is what those priorities are. Coordinated care organizations can be a part of it, but really what is most important is that it's locally controlled and directed. That was the key part that came from the World Health Care's recommendations, that you have to have local control and have the efficacy of your destiny being directed by it. And that's what the charge for that group is. The best minds in Oregon are wrestling with this question, and it isn't one line. Frankly, it is the most thoughtful piece of legislation that I've seen be proposed and passed in the last 5 years that's related to healthcare.
And what is the fiscal impact of it?
That's one of the assessments they're making. And I can't answer that. I can't.
Do you have an idea? Is it dramatically more expensive than?
No. Most of it is the delivery. The financing part of it is actually restructuring what we're doing now. Well, we have indirect expenses and direct expenses and externalities that exist today, that all of those kinds of complicated economic calculations are being included in the assessments of it. It isn't going to be a single bill. The cost shift actually could be very minor relative to what we're spending now, because in part of what you had indicated earlier is that we have layers of administration. And some of those layers of administration, frankly, could be reduced or eliminated.
And when will this report be finished?
It's due September, at the end of September. That because the COVID and meetings and all of that was disrupted.
Will there be legislative days hearings on it in September, or will you wait until next year?
The legislative concept has got to go through November, in November, and then the proposal is going to be we'll have a House bill that's related to it in January. So I can't emphasize this more. Oregon has been moving in this direction for a long time. We've made these incremental changes. We've already started to address what you had concerned with the social determinants of health, and making local control and local coordinated care organizations the ones that really are the ones that are delivering care. And that kind of efficacy and relationship is what's a centerpiece to this legislation. It isn't having an interceding administrative body making decisions for someone else.
James, I know what Charles's first bill is going to be if he's elected, because that's what you came in with. What's your first bill if you're elected? What are you going to introduce?
Well, I've been dwelling on healthcare, so I'm going to move on to education. As I said, I've been back in the state now for 4 years. One of so what I would say is the second thing that has struck me is our education system in the state. And the number of people that I personally know who are electing to leave the state because of education is alarming. We are second from the bottom only to New Mexico for graduation rate. We're at 80% right now for kids graduating from high school on time. We can significantly do better than that as a state. The solution is not to eliminate testing standards or lower the bar. The solution is that we need to commit to at least be up above the national average of 90%, that we need a short-term plan to get us there over the next 3 years, and we need to fund the Oregon Quality Education Commission recommendations, which outline exactly what we need to do to get there. My personal belief, only because my wife is a teacher, my sister, daughter, niece, sister-in-law, all in the education system, either as teachers, principals, is that we have an older, just like I think there's advancements in how we deliver and organize care, how we do our education for elementary K through 12, that we have an opportunity to move to a year-round school system that is predictable, takes pressure off of the need for childcare, that doesn't result in a lapse of learning because kids are off for 3 months during part of the year and they spend a period of time catching back up. So I think we need to fund it. We need to add more days in school and focus on raising the bar, not lowering it.
So we already spend significantly more than many states who have higher graduation rates than us. And we just passed the Student Success Act, which will put over $1 billion a year of new money into the system.
Correct.
So the issue doesn't seem to be, money may be part of it, it's not only money. So you've given us one specific, that you would move to a longer school year. That's expensive. Is there anything else that you think you could do, that the legislature could do specifically to take a system that is in the middle, actually higher than the middle in terms of per capita funding, and make it perform somewhere better than 49th?
Yeah, the new money that's come through moves us up to the median. It doesn't move us up above that. And as I said, yeah, I don't believe we should be striving for the middle. We need to be striving for
we all agree on that.
I would take the middle, frankly, but
yeah, the middle's a hell of a lot better than where we are now. But are other specifics besides the year-round school that you would advocate for?
I think the only other thing that I would advocate for is we have disproportionate performance across the state. Those counties, Washington County, Wheeler County, the graduation percentage that I was saying, that's the state average. Those counties are significantly low. Wheeler is the lowest county in the entire nation.
Jesus Christ.
I did not know that.
Yes. And we need to have a focus to lift up the bottom, to give them the resources and the support that they need to perform. It can't just be on the Portland metro area to address those numbers. And so I think the rural parts of the state need specific focus and attention.
Charles, you wanted to jump in?
Well, actually, there's a couple of things, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that we have record funding that occurred, and the quality education model numbers are almost lined up. There's very little difference. One of the things that's really tough is that the current environment in schools is really toxic. It starts at the school boards, and that kind of moves to the leadership, and retention and recruitment of diverse teachers and educators is really what's challenging in public education. And I have to say that it seems that there's a direct attack on the value of public education, and that's one of the things that I actually think we need to spend a little bit of time on, as challenging the red herrings of critical race theory and some of the others that really distract and undermine public education as an institution. And that is really the conservative kind of approach that's seems to be the motive. So there are a lot of people who would be great teachers who aren't going into it. We are going to have a big, tough time retaining the educators that we have because of the assaults that are occurring in the boardrooms and even in the classrooms. The politicization that's occurred in this last year is just absolutely astounding. And why people would want to say, oh, I want to be a teacher in Oregon, really is we've got to make that the focus. And we also have to think about what that average means. The average graduation rate, part of the reason that it, from a stats perspective, is that we have disparities based on race and ethnicity that exist in the state that aren't actually addressed. So when we talk about the broad swath and say our graduation rates, there's certain communities that are more adversely impacted by graduation rates than others. And that's the Native Americans, Hispanic populations, and the Blacks and African American graduation rates. In some districts are doing really well, but in others they're not, and they're still marginalized. So we have to pay more attention to equity within the schools and make sure that that's still a value that's articulated by the school boards and the teachers, and that we don't back away from it, because that's really the kind of society that we need to be building.
Can I ask each of you who the endorsement is that you've received in this cycle that you're most proud of? Charles, you can go first.
I'd say it's John Kitzhaber's.
Okay.
Yeah, for me it's Rick Metzger. I want to make one other comment because you were asking for, so what are your practical things that you believe need to happen? And one of the other ones that I'm advocating for is more functional literacy in financial. So I think of it as finance literacy. When I was in high school, you had a class on how to manage a checking account and what did credit mean, and
Right.
we don't have that anymore, and we're graduating young adults who don't know how to manage their money fiscally, their life, and make decisions. And I kind of think of it in the same vein as I do healthcare literacy. People being able to understand where they go for care, what their care instructions mean, other things. There's just some basic literacy and I'd say day-to-day life skills that we need to incorporate in, especially for the 9th through 12th level education.
Okay, great.
You have questions? Okay. I'll ask each of you to ask each other a question real quick.
You can go ahead first.
Yeah, and I'm going back to Aaron's question about you ran and then you had some lessons learned, but as you think about what's transpired over your period of work and running for office, what's your advice to me?
Well,
Lose.
Well, that's I would. There's no offense meant by this, but I would make a stronger connection with the community, the local community. I understand, volunteer in some of the community health, the food pantry, that my Father's Heart. Get to join the local chamber. Maybe serve on the board of the Clackamas Community College and understand the link between the education and the businesses there's there. There's some opportunities to become a little more connected to the concerns and the nature of the community. And I would have probably come and talked to me first if I were you. I would have said, Charles, I'm thinking about running. What do you think? And then we could have had a discussion and see where we might be able to meet your needs as well as my own, and some of those of the community.
Thank you.
Do you have a question for him?
Can you tell me about your role with the United Health? I'm not clear. I mean, it is an insurance company, but you said it wasn't. Can you expand on that?
United Health Group is the parent company for United Healthcare and for Optum. They are two kind of divisions of the same company. So my role with United Health Group is in value creation to lower the cost of care across both the payer and the delivery sides of the company, leveraging the two of them. So specifically, things like what care needs to be done in a hospital. What's the clinical model for lowering care? So I'm going to give you a really microscopic example. Rather than look at it as a cost problem, as a care problem, the ACA requires that all plans provide at no cost an annual or at the age of 50 a colonoscopy screening, specifically colonoscopy, and yet the view being we need to have effective mechanisms for colon cancer screening programs. So we moved the program away from saying, oh, you're 50, you need to go in and get your colonoscopy done, which nationally tends to run about $800 at a low in an ambulatory setting and up to $20,000 in hospital settings in some places. So the trying to move that cost, provide free home testing, a FIT test or a Cologuard test, people, screen them. If it comes back positive, then get them in to see a gastroenterologist and do the appropriate screening. So our movement was to identify, and I'm giving a simple example, but cancer, heart, so cardiovascular, orthopedic, a number of channels to lean in early, provide intervention, steer the care in a way that provided higher quality at lower cost. Sometimes through our own delivery system, oftentimes using AI to anticipate care and needs and steer care in advance, especially orthopedic and cardiovascular.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Every cycle we do what we call a fun question, and that's intended to get to know you a little bit and get a sense of your personality. So I'll preface this fun question by acknowledging that the pandemic is not over, that there's plenty of disease still in our community, and that we're still dealing with the ramifications of COVID-19. That said, we are reaching the point where people are beginning to return into something that resembles normal life. And so I'm wondering if there's been a moment in the past few months where you've had an experience of joy at returning to something like civilization. So, for me, it was a month ago. I went to a Blazers Pelicans game at Moda Center and was cheering for CJ McCollum, even though he's on the other team. And it was just pretty great to see 20,000 people in an arena gathering and talking and laughing and drinking and watching some basketball. Most of them weren't wearing masks, but that almost felt okay. So was there a moment for either of you that stood out as like a moment we went to a concert or a ball game or even a birthday party? Charles?
Actually, I had a moment of terror.
Sure.
I just went into a store and then I didn't have my mask and then I saw other people. But that's really not the moment that you're asking about. I would say it was yesterday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I was with Joe Biden at his visit. And seeing all the elected officials, the others, the governor, the congressman, the senators, and without mask, and it finally felt like real. Not that we were having some fractured kind of conversation where I could see and feel how people were really articulating themselves, and that was, I'd say it was just yesterday that I had that little bit of joy, because I felt like I was making a connection for the first time in a long time.
Great. James?
So this sounds like a transparency question, and for me, my wife and I hike a lot, especially in the gorge and some other places, and we like to do hills with our dogs. And I don't know if you guys are hikers or not, but if you're going up steep stuff, you're going up Dog Mountain or something, and you're going up there and you've got a mask on.
That's hard.
Holy cow! And I had a moment literally with me and my dog going up Dog Mountain when the masks came off, and it was like, oh my gosh, I can friggin' breathe again. For me, that was a big moment.
When was that?
That was about a month ago.
So you were hiking with a mask on until a month ago?
Yeah.
Because I love the hikes. I was there, and long ago I just said I can't do this. I mean, I kept hiking, but I just couldn't work.
Yeah. What I would do is I would pull it down, then I pull it back up, and I just and that's why even coming here, I usually have a mask with me. To me, it's a courtesy.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much to both of you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
And that's you got it.
Thanks,
And all you
Carlos.
need.
My apologies for being late.
No problem.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming in.
No problem. I think I have adequate parking too.